Baumaßnahmen. Also wir werden dieses Gespräch auf Englisch machen, damit das ganze Team daran teilnehmen kann. So we're going to have this talk in English. Wenn jemand lieber gerne auf Deutsch Fragen stellen möchte, ist das natürlich überhaupt gar kein Problem. Das geht auch. Danke. Welcome. Thank you all. Thank you all for this show and also yesterday's show and for taking the time to have a little chat with us. This is supposed to be an artist talk, but it's also an audience talk. So basically it's an opportunity to get into conversation a little bit about your experience, about your work and process. So yeah. It would be really nice, maybe Anan, if you would like to introduce the team. I'm Katja, I'm working here at FFT. I'm feeling very much at home. Yes. You could also feel very much at home because you have been working here for quite a bit.
Years.
Yes, and also already in this space.
Yeah.
About 1.5 years ago or something like that. And also with part of the team.
Yeah.
But I think, yeah, maybe you tell us a little bit about the team, or you can say that yourselves, and also about the process or the way you work together. That would be great.
So my name is Anan, and I'm responsible for directing the show and for the concept and the research of the show. This is Ambrush Ivanios. Who did all the creative coding, development, Unreal, UI, hacking stuff. This is Malou Peters, who did composition and sound design. Then next to Malou, Bridge Wezo, who is a local actually, and who is also a choreographer and performer. And Kiron Gina, who is also a choreographer and performer, or a director and a maker and performer. And same for Karol Tyminski. Yeah, and we worked in different blocks. I worked with different people at different times. And then we had a block to bring everything together, roughly spoken, yeah, I would say. And we did some research phases quite a bit in advance, like almost a year before we started to do some research on motion tracking, because Malou, Ambrush and I already made a last work together, Virtual Wombs. And a lot of the research that was important for this work kind of started where we left it off with Virtual Wombs. Like things we couldn't really do with Virtual Wombs, we picked up again for Resurrect in Peace.
Maybe we can get into that a little later. And also I'm really interested in like the intersections between all of your lines of work, but maybe we will get to that. But I know that a lot of people were thinking about this, obviously, about the mix of physical live performance and choreography and media and technology, obviously. But maybe let's start and talk a little bit about the pigeon, the passenger pigeon. When did you first encounter that animal, and when did you notice that you are going to make a work about it?
Actually, I wanted to make a work that was going to be, or I had this idea to make a funeral for extinct species for a long time, but I thought it's one funeral for many species. And then I started thinking about the concept more, and I did a lot of research. And anyways, I'm really fascinated by genetic engineering, and this also, like this whole maybe post-human perspective on the interdependence or the intertwinedness of nature and technology is very much also part of Virtual Wombs, the last show, but with a completely different angle. And also with Virtual Wombs, this whole research on post-human perspectives, and with that also post-anthropocentric perspectives became more important, and therefore it kind of made sense for me to try and go more down that road. And then I found the passenger pigeon. I don't even remember how I came across it. I guess it was probably some newspaper article or something, because there was this wave of newspaper articles about they are bringing back the woolly mammoth, they are bringing back this, they are bringing back this. And among that was, of course, also the passenger pigeon. And then I did research on this company, or this like I don't even know if they're a company, like Revive and Restore they are called, and they are these scientists who really are very influential and are very good at lobbying, and they bring back all these animals, but they also do a lot of genetic rescue. And I found the passenger pigeon there, and I thought it's kind of nice to make a project about a pigeon, because people find pigeons disgusting, or humans find pigeons annoying, and maybe it's more interesting to make something about a pigeon than about a pony, for example, because they also resurrected a pony.
And
Maybe
what's genetic rescue?
Genetic rescue, they actually rescued a pony. It's when there's like only very few animals left in one species, and then I cannot explain it in detail, but also through genetic engineering, they kind of like can uppen the diversity in the genome pools, and then they make the animals mate, or they clone the animals and then they make the animals mate. But then you still have to see to it that there's some kind of like diversity in the genes. Yeah, but that's what they do. So basically that's also their PR now. They talk more about genetic rescue than about resurrection. But like 2 years ago, they were all about resurrection. So they changed their strategy a little bit, like in terms of publicity. Yeah.
And how's it going for the passenger pigeon at the moment? Can you tell us? Has it resurrected already?
I think not, and it's actually become a bit quiet around the passenger pigeon. The person that also speaks in the show, when you hear this podcast, that's Ben Novak, who is the lead scientist of the extinction of the passenger pigeon, and he's really obsessed with this animal. And he has been very much on the forefront of Revive and Restore. And now on their internet page, you can see that the passenger pigeon is kind of like, it's now one page out of many. So I think it's not going so well. But it's they have decoded the genome. So technically it's completely possible to already make the pigeon. But as he also explains, it's really complicated to clone birds in general. And then the next step is, of course, to have the surrogate other bird accept the new bird, and then you have to have a lot of birds, and then you have to kind of like fake that they think that they are kind of like a flock, and then then you have to teach them where to live, and of course their habitat doesn't exist anymore, so it's very complicated. And then why you ask why they want to bring back the passenger pigeon, which is not entirely clear, because the passenger pigeon really doesn't have a habitat anymore at all. Yeah.
That's interesting that you mentioned that now, because what we are encountering in your piece is the maybe fictional habitat, I guess. That's what I thought. I mean, we dive into this world, and I was thinking you created some kind of artificial virtual place for this pigeon where it could maybe die in peace and then maybe come back to, or maybe it's also destroyed with the pigeon itself. It would be really nice, maybe with your words, can you take us to this world that we encounter? Maybe also explain a little bit how it's made, maybe Ambrush, and also how it's navigated, because as an audience, sometimes for me it was quite clear how you navigated with the devices that you use, and then at other points I had a lot of questions, and I think that would be great to get to know a little more in detail.
Okay. Yeah, the creation of this word is also an interesting question, because it's basically a very dumb reproduction of the diversity of a forest digitally through procedural steps. And the models that we used are photo scans. So basically they are already a replication of something real that is then procedurally generated over terrain that is also procedurally generated, trying to reproduce geological realities or processes over time that form the surface of place. So the nature itself is also a very man-made output, actually. So it resonates, I think, quite well with the pigeons who can come back or not.
Hi. I think I can speak about the visual digital part of it. So it's like the correlation between the body, the space, and the trackers, the touch, the animation of it, like how you engage your body into virtuality, and what is this hybrid perspective of being present in a real space but also in the virtual space. I think that's mostly my experience with this piece, because it's like being in both sides and also trying to navigate that space with it.
But maybe very basic, maybe everyone knows that apart from me, but what can these trackers actually do? I think it's different things, right? What are they capable of, and what can you do with them? What do they make you do on stage?
And the way that is for this piece is about tracking an object in the virtual space, may I write, and triggering some points of Amber's world into the story of Anan. So it's like animating the object itself, and it can also be attached to different the other functionality of the technology, I guess, is also other purposes for gamings. And
it's maybe just quickly about the history of the tracker. It's called Vive Tracker, and it was developed as a device that is used with the VR headset for gaming, basically for like different kind of gaming purposes. For example, I don't know, you would play tennis in VR, and then you could have your tennis racket, and you could attach the Vive tracker to the tennis racket, and then you can track your movements very easily. That's what it was kind of conceived for. And it's really, what is amazing about it in comparison to other motion tracking devices is that it works independently of the human skeleton, because a lot of motion tracking works with the human skeleton, which is then calculated into the digital skeleton, and you cannot easily take these points of information apart. But with the Vive tracker, you have basically one single point in the room that you can move really easily, and it basically it has optical sensors, and it talks to, in our case, 4 different stations. And these stations then, they give that data to the scenes that Ambrosch programmed in Unreal in the game engine. Yeah, that's roughly how it works. Yeah.
And what is interesting, definitely, it is from my perspective, and I believe Bridge and Kieran would agree with me, is that when we do have this function of showing you the world, for example, be camera operators or be drawing, it's like really not only introducing technology, but also kind of, yeah, taking you on the discovery of the world. We discover ourselves. And as normally dance is not is not connected to technological devices, and this is also something that was very new for me. It was very interesting to be actually moved by those objects and by the world we are navigating. And yeah, it's also sometimes it also asks one to really kind of minimize what you do. Like, okay, like here's the clarity, you know, I want to show of my relation to the technology and stuff. So yeah, it's one thing is like what the device does to the world that happens on the screen, to your experience, but also another thing is what it does for choreography, how it shapes it.
And also for the audience, I might add, because for me, it was a very dense kind of experience when you don't really know what's happening, and then all these different functions that you mentioned, like a camera and like a brush, and also sometimes you can move the objects in this world for us. And also, other than in virtual reality experiences where I enter the world with goggles, you are kind of doing that for us. And that's also, I think, a very interesting theater experience. I haven't entered a virtual reality theater piece like that before. So
Yeah, that's also really the research interest that we had, because when we made virtual wombs, we had pre-produced scenes for the virtual reality. So the audience had, each member of the audience had a VR headset, and they would go back and forth between the physical space and the virtual space by simply taking off the headset, because at that point when we made the show, the Oculus Quest or Meta Quest that we were using didn't allow the pass-through function yet. So you couldn't actually, the VR headset has little cameras, so you can actually look out, of course. And they didn't allow that for developers to be used until only recently. So we couldn't use that. And therefore, actually, and we wanted to use we wanted also to work with motion tracking, because we knew it's kind of rigid what we are building. It's in VR, and it's in the physical space, but the physical space has no possibility to kind of like have an effect on the VR. So it's kind of like it's static in a way. So this was really what we wanted to work on, that now, and then the trackers kind of gave us this, and the big projections gave us then this idea of, basically the audiences or the projections are basically windows into a VR headset, kind of, you know, like, and the audience is more like, looking together, which was also something nice to work with, or at least an interest to work with, that the audience is more in the room together, because in virtual rooms they were very much each in their own space, which was also interesting, but just a different kind of experience.
What I found really interesting working in this piece was how to create empathy on a human level using technology for another species, and how to relate sound, live sound, with virtual reality and live performance. This is all like such an interesting threading where, like, how do you create an experience for the audience? So yeah, it was a really mind-shifting experience to challenge our way of working just only on a physical level.
we should talk about the sound experience also. I mean, also as being part of this bodily encounter, of course, the visual encounter with these huge birds. When I saw it for the first time, that was very uncanny for me and kind of very special. But I think it wouldn't be without the voice of the bird and the flapping of the wings, and also this humorous level of like having the pigeon talk to us. So yeah, I mean, maybe you can tell us a little bit how you made that bird speak to us.
Yeah, it's interesting because I wonder how many people here relate the sound of the voice to actual pigeons as you know them? Do you feel something there? Okay, because there are people that are telling me this creature is very fascinating, but it has nothing to do with anything we know. But it's actually built, or I did a research into, first of all, there is a transcript from the passenger pigeon's sound, but it's not actually ever recorded. So there is no voice recording of it. So it's like a score, like a musical score. And it had several exclamations, and it's written in a Wikipedia page that it had sorts of communication styles. And then I went through all kinds of bird voice libraries, analyzed also the use of the vocal tract of how the pigeon, because it can use like the beak closed and use the tract here to make this sound that's inside, you know. So and then I made like a kind of instrument of a collection of many, many pigeon species, because of course this one, when it resurrects, what will have changed, and therefore it also has these kind of glitchy digitalized effects. And then I don't know, I think I got a kind of obsessed with this instrument of this voice and got a more emotional relationship to these sounds. And then when Anan wrote the text, it became all very logical that these emotional and humorous expressions in the sounds related to what was written. And yeah, that's how it came about, I think. And then I guess for the atmosphere, other than that, I don't know if this is important, but most of the textures are all made from pigeon wings, pigeon sounds, even the beats, everything. The forest is also, a lot of that is actually pigeon sourced, like the DNA of pigeon sound. This is really like me enjoying my own job because nobody cares.
No, I think it's absolutely central to the experience, actually. And why, I mean, what you just explained was the voice of the pigeon speaking, but those pigeon sounds, the other with the pigeon, I don't know what's that in English, gurren.
Yeah, cooing,
and also the flapping of the wings.
Yeah,
it feels as if there are birds all around you. Were there actual birds involved? Did you record actual living birds, or how did you?
No,
there was this little birdie today in the morning. Did
Yeah.
someone tell you there was a little yellow bird in the lobby? Three of our colleagues rescued it today in the theater. It was brought to a
I do have a
friendly
different relationship to the pigeons in front of my studio window now, that I think have been listening pretty much what I've been endlessly sampling and recording. And I don't know. But the wings, they are actually from libraries. There's like whole AIs that have collected these things, and then I mean they're time stretched also. That's why they're so digitalized. So they make like mistakes, and then they're sized up, so they are more low frequencies, and it sounds more threatening, like the size of the pigeon on the screen. Yeah.
There is a question.
Sure.
Let me bring you my mic.
I can understand you.
Yeah, but for the recording, please. Thank you.
Hi. What I was wondering is, how did you generate the vocabulary of the pigeon? Did you choose words linked to specific sounds of the generated samples? Or did you link it for Silben?
What's that?
Syllables? Or did you link it for each letter by itself?
No, it's in the end, I'm not working that mathematically. So I understand this question. I could have also built like almost an alphabet. And I think what I did is I made a library of vocal sounds with certain emotional sections, mapped them under a keyboard, and then just played while looking at the text until I found combinations of expressions that had intuitively a logical effect. Other than that, I mean, when I was listening back to it now, I was literally a bit possessed, you know. It was, how did I make this bird talk? I don't know. It was super logical for me back then. So
you could feel the emotional part.
Yeah.
but so it is not like you could reverse engineer or translate the bird language into the German language or English language.
You mean if I could, like, if now somebody gives me a full text and it would roll out?
Not with real birds, but
yeah.
if you would take your sounds, it is not like real words, like a language you generated. It is more like in transporting emotions.
Yes.
I don't think
so.
birds have the same grammar as humans.
Did you ask a bird?
No, but there's actually really interesting projects that, like, there's a startup that is working on an AI that maybe in the future can communicate with animals. They're like using huge libraries to try and analyze how different animals talk, and they have the hope that in the future at some point maybe human animals can understand better and maybe even try to talk to animals. Yeah, it's really interesting. They do it with AI, of course, obviously.
Maybe I can continue. I was very amazed by the light, and I found that with the projection you have that, I don't know the English word, Spalt. Slit, yeah, you have that slit between the projection screens, and you also repeat that slit in kind of the lights on the floor. And I feel like this, having this, I feel that there's a meaning behind it. And I was wondering if you want to reveal it, or at least
That there's
tell
what
it,
behind it?
a meaning, or something which is more than just an aesthetic moment, but, or how it came to be. That would be.
There's actually a team member missing today, Theresa Baumgartner, who did the light design and also the spatialization, like the also the video mapping. She could probably answer that question differently. What we did talk about a lot was this idea of how to use the space and how to create kind of a sacred space. And we were always in conversation about kind of like shaking out or away our Christian socialization, or like our Christian socialized way of looking at the architecture of a sacred space. So this we talked a lot about, but we knew, of course, that we want the light to help us create some kind of some kind of atmosphere of ritualistic space. And I think I cannot say much about the slits, but I mean there was an early concept of actually also using projectors as light sources, but we couldn't ask for more projectors, so we cut that. For me, these big banners are kind of like windows into, which they really are, because the virtual cameras of the game engine point at each projection surface, basically. So they are kind of windows, but they're also giving the room, like they're kind of like also making a space. Yeah, that's not exactly answering your question.
No, but
it's an answer.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Anyone else? There you go.
When you did your research on, or I mean, not maybe not scientific research, but research on pigeons, did you also include like cultural representations of pigeons? It just came to my mind that Donna Haraway wrote something on pigeons, or that, I mean, not the wandering pigeon. How is it called? Wandering passenger pigeon. I mean, but the whole symbolic meaning of pigeons in general. Did you touch on that a bit in your preparation, or and if so, how did it maybe?
I did definitely read also the Haraway passage again about pigeons, which I thought was interesting. I did. I mean, I think from the moment I started thinking about this project, I anyways started to see these animals differently, or like to see pigeons differently, and also to see pigeons everywhere. And I think in different cultures, they have very different connotations. Like, for example, a friend of mine also works with pigeons for VR, and he's from Iran. And in Persian culture, the pigeon is really sacred animal, which is interesting because, and of course, the pigeon also appears in the Bible in Christian culture a lot. And but then in let's say Central Europe, everyday life, the pigeon is kind of die Ratte der Lüfte. A lot of people say, like the rat, the flying rat. Yeah, so I was very interested in the meaning of the pigeon in different contexts and stuff. Yeah, for sure. If you have any interesting pieces of information, please share.
Oh, I was just thinking, I think there is a poem of a German poet, contemporary poet. I don't remember I'm not sure. Maybe it was. Maybe someone can help. But I think it's a poem about the passenger pigeon. It's like the collection of poems about extinct species, and I think there was one poem about a pigeon at least. Maybe it was the passenger pigeon. Does someone remember? I can't remember. Maybe Silke Scheuermann, but I'm not sure. Yeah.
It's also very interesting for those of you who have been following the program of the whole day, and I'm sorry, I know you didn't have the time, but in the morning we started with this walk through the city, and it was also very much around the question of nature and technology and creating nature in the urban space, and also the marketing or PR lie of making a green city and stuff like that. And I think the pigeon, of course, is an animal very closely related to urbanization and to the way humans change their life into a very urban kind of lifestyle. And so yeah, that's just something that also came to my mind because I had the privilege of following the whole program throughout the day. And also I'm trying to formulate a question, and I'm really interested about maybe the concepts or terminology that you use, because clearly the division between nature and technology doesn't serve us here anymore, and maybe that's what you also mean by post-Anthropocene concepts. And also when you said it was a lot about empathy, I'm trying to, formulate a question about this experience that I had in your performance, where that gets into a very interesting kind of next level relationship between me, the surrounding, the concept of a bird, and this high technology that you are using. So I don't know if that makes sense, or if you want to say something, or to that. I mean,
yes. So, anyone?
Post-Anthropocene,
I think what was when we were talking about the project and like the whole complexity of the problem of the extincting animals, like what I relate was your mention towards about the empathy towards animals. It's also like the question of like why there are those attempts, this like feeling of loss, of grief, of the world that we will never be able to experience. There's also this very poetic, romantic side to it. I think one of the things that Ben Novak was saying was basically that him as a child, he saw an image of this bird that he will never be able to see. And so it's also like we find ourselves in this moment that we don't even know if using this technology is going to bring anything good to the environment. I mean, the birds that we then speak about in this project, they have been traveling in flocks of billions, yeah? They could darken the sky. You could shoot in the sky without like eyes closed, and they were falling in like dozens. And it's also just like this fantastic image, and it's a true information. I'm not inventing it. It's like, yeah, a fairy tale they want to bring back. But as Anan has mentioned, you know, the natural habitats of those birds do not exist anymore. And like, what would it take to bring them back? Can we actually hold this? Like, how the current ecosystem or the current shape of the ecosystem would react to it. So there is also just like this very, very weird, complex, um, there are those complex like conflicts between like this desire and the need and yeah, and also fetishization of technology, because why we don't do it because we can, but then also sometimes like those scientists are inventing all kinds of really ridiculous reasons to engage with those attempts. So yeah, I think it's all more like there are no answers. There are just all those like questions that are quite fascinating. Yeah.
I think, yeah, one thing that was also really interesting for me researching about this whole idea of like, yeah, genetic engineering and restoring biodiversity is really the question of, yeah, what's the motivation? I mean, of course, there's not one motivation for one person, but what are the motivations? And is one motivation also, yeah, is it like, yeah, it's so complex. Like, to what extent can we actually feel guilty for something that has happened 100 years ago and on a different continent and with, of course, under different circumstances? Can I don't know? Can people who sit in this experience still feel a sense of guilt for how human animals walk through the world and I don't know, and drive other species into extinction? That was, I think, a big question, this idea of like guilt, but then also the idea of grief. Can we actively grieve for that? Like, is there an emotional space for that, or can we invent this emotional space? But then also at the same time, we are trying to bring back now these species, which I find so fascinating. I love that this is happening, but at the same time, it's like kind of playing God, of course. Like, again, humans put themselves above all other species and say, but we are the species that can actually decide if you come back or not. You know, so it's, yeah, it's a conundrum.
Yeah, and of course, speaking of like this artistic experience, I think it's very interesting, this kind of power play that you engage in, that you have this technology and you really master it to a certain level, but that there's, for me at least, also this feeling of tenderness and giving away the power. It's not we do something just because we can, but it's more like we try and use this technology also to bring something to the world that is not possible, like some kind of fiction for this very moment or something like that. So, yeah. Are there any more questions?
Well, I remember this debate and eco-criticism about personification. So if we can speak as other species, so as I mentioned, for example, in poetry, like speaking as the pigeon. And I wondered if how you thought about this, and if maybe you also included multiple perspectives to like get away from this problem of personification, because I had the impression that sometimes, maybe I'm wrong, I'm not sure, but that you like flew like the pigeon, but then it was represented. Then we saw the virtual reality, the viewers, as we were flying like the pigeon. So there were multiple perspectives. And maybe could you just elaborate a bit on the question of personification and on this multitude of perspectives?
Yeah, I think that's because there is not really a right way how to do this. Because, like, I think, anyways, the whole endeavor is like doomed to fail, because what I wanted to do is create a post-anthropocentric experience, but I'm still a human who is actually creating this, so it will never work. So, and this I knew. And therefore I decided to rather like play with it a little bit. And that's why these different perspectives come into play, or also this ambivalence of, do the performers become pigeons, or are they, because a lot of the movement is very bird inspired, of course, which was also really beautiful and fun movement research. And but then it was also important to not try and actually become the pigeon, because that would have also been somehow not right. And I think when writing the text for the pigeon, I was kind of intrigued to play with this idea of making it so obvious that a human wrote this text, when the pigeon says you can Google it, or I don't know, these things, when it kind of like, So I decided to play with this a little bit, because there's not really a way how to actually get out of this problematic, let's say, because we can of course not speak for the pigeon.
Or would you like to say something? I think also in regards to like choreography and dancing like pigeons, I mean, it's also in many cultures there are attempts to connect to nature by trying to embody different species. And I think it's just something that exists as a form of connecting, as a form of ritual, then representation. And in regards to personification of animals, I also feel like, even though that there are like there is a full like wide stretch of how we can speak of animals or for animals, as Anan said, but I think it's also like important to acknowledge that if we have actually the actual agenda of tightening relation between the human and the environment, I think it's also about creating some kind of language that is somehow understandable and can like bring emotions out. I think it's somehow form of diplomacy as well, to as we like talking with the language that we know how to hack in order to bring one closer also to nature. I feel somehow like bringing the languages of the both together and bridging them. It's kind of an entry point of towards crossing this centralization of the human experience. So I think it's something like very fluid, blurry, and I think we should think about it a bit like an entry point to something further.
From my point of view, it was very clearly that there is a barrier between those both layers. I don't know if it's only my point of view, but as the scene started, you started carrying the devices in the different areas of the room. And this was, for me, it was the communication that you carry something, you carry the message, and there is a second layer generated in the story for me. And it was like you are a messenger for the story which has been told, but not from you, but you enable these devices to tell the story. So it was this a differentiation between those two layers for me. It was very clearly from the beginning. For me, it was not the feeling that there's a blurry or you are the pigeon. Just another point of view.
Just one addition. It's interesting that you say that, or that you experience it like this, because we also talked about the performers being kind of the mediums of this ritual, or the ceremony holders of the ritual. So in that sense, we also, that when we were like talking about how can we conceptualize what you are doing, it was in this way. But of course, I think you can also shift perception of the human bodies in some kind of ways during the experience or during the show. Yeah, and I think, yeah, that's in my how but everybody sees it differently, of course. How I see it, you become also some kind of oscillating beings, or some, yeah, I don't know. But yeah, I mean.
Yeah, I also really like this image of diplomacy, like this very human art of diplomacy, as to describe what you are doing there. I think there are so many more aspects we could talk about. My suggestion, maybe we take it to the bar, because you have all been working long hours today. Unless there are more questions that need to be asked right now in front of cameras with a microphone.
Or someone from us wants to still.
You want to say something, or? Okay, then I thank you very much for staying, and thank you so much for all that insight. See you at the bar.